So the next thing I've done is I've had a look through my pencils and I've started to choose what colors I think that I might use for my picture. So you can see along the side of my picture here, or you might do it on a piece of paper in your book or on just a blank bit of paper. I've marked out the sort of tones that I think I might use. So I'm even seeing some purpley tones coming through little parts of the skin, so I might even work some purple into there as well. Sometimes you can get blue tones, green tones. You can add in and emphasize areas if you want more color coming through your picture. It's up to you how you want to approach it. I always use, no matter what level of darkness or redness or whatever, no matter what the skin looks like, I always use 997 in my Prismacolor set to do faces. I find it's a really good base tone for skin. So I am probably going to use a bit of this pinky one as well, 927. And then I've sort of selected other tones that I think will go well in the eye. So you need to do that depending on your picture. The main thing to remember though is that no matter what tones I use, so long as I have contrast, it's probably going to turn out pretty good. So worry more about the fact that you have shadows and highlights than worrying about your colors. Sometimes people spend so long worrying about what colors to choose that they actually don't get around to doing the drawing because they're just so worked up about not having the exact right tone. But when you actually look at a picture, if I put this through a filter and I changed it to have more green undertones, or if I made it look a little bit more sepia, or you could go through the millions of different filters you've got on Instagram and change this picture a million different times, and it's always going to have slightly different colorings to it. So you need to worry more about, do I still have the highlights and shadows, because they're going to be there no matter what. The tones and the colorings, they might look a bit different even if I just print this on a different printer. So worry more about your highlights and your shadows than you are about your colors. Your colors, so long as they're reasonably natural looking, so long as you have a tonal range, it'll be fine. So I'm using my Prismacolor set. There's loads of different pencils out there you can use. Just make sure you're using some artist quality pencils. Using pencils like, you know, your stock standard Faber-Castell watercolors or whatever, they're not that good for blending and layering. So these are really good if you want to do just, you know, stock standard one colored sort of blocky plain artworks, like maybe if you were trying to achieve a very low level of shading. But if you're trying to achieve realism, you need something that's going to build up a little bit more like your Prismacolors. Okay, so we're going to start with the eye and put the details in there, and then we'll work our way out to the skin. I always start with the eye because I feel like you need to have that as a starting point, because it sets the tone for the rest of your picture. So I've folded my photo down so that I can get it nice and close. Also, I'm making sure that I don't have the pencil on the back smudging onto my page, so I've covered that. And I'm going to use the picture that I've got all my squiggly lines on, because then I can actually see where I've been drawing. So you need to take a white and you need to mark out your really light areas first. Now normally I would take a very long time to do an eye, but I'm going to work as fast as I can for the sake of this demo. You could probably spend an hour to 2 hours just on the eye if you really wanted to. So where I can see these greyish tones, I'm making sure that I don't go too bright or too blue. I'm using a pencil with a bluey undertone, but it is more grey than anything. And I'm applying it lightly because I am preparing to layer it. I want to build up over the top of it. So I'm not pressing down thickly. So the great thing about Prismas is you can layer a lot. If you take it too far, it'll get shiny and waxy. So try to build it up slowly where possible. And the more colours you put in, the better it's going to look. So I'm taking my slightly darker grey tone now. I'm just going to go around the outside of that iris there so that I don't lose my line. And when I'm drawing, I'm using tiny little circles because the tiny little circles blend a lot better than stripes. So I'm not really marking out too much detail yet. Just getting those basic colour variations and tonal variations happening. Starting to smudge it together a little bit. I'm actually going to use my flesh tone down here because I'm seeing a little bit of that show through. And because I've already got my white there, it's not going to come up too much. And I'm seeing a bit of texture, some marks, so I actually want those colours bleeding into each other. And notice how I keep putting one pencil down, picking up the next one. You need to keep switching, you need to keep changing colours so that you have a variety of different colours showing through. That will make it look more realistic and more natural. I tend to use a lighter tone to blend. So if I've put a darker tone down and I want to blend it, I'll work back on with a lighter one. Depends on what colours I'm using, but generally just take a step down, so something that's a little bit lighter than whatever you've got in front of you. You can get special blending pencils as well if you want to use them. I prefer to just use the lighter colours. So now I'm going to take a slightly darker brown and start to darken up the areas where I'm seeing a brown tone showing through a little bit. And I'm trying to make these blending areas imperfect because I'm seeing lots of detail happening in this eye. And then I'm going to take my black and go all the way around the edge. I think that it is so important to have contrast in your drawings. And I think that a lot of artists are scared of black, but it actually can make things really stand out and look really nice. So when we do that pupil in the center there, we don't want it to be too much like a cat's eye where it's just a clean cut line. We actually want it to bleed out a little bit into what's around it. So I'm just going to do these little lines coming out of it there, and then I'm going to work back into it with a lighter pencil. Sometimes people even take a gel pen to put their lighter areas back in if you find that your white's not working back into it that well. So you could spend a long time working on that, or you can leave it as it is. It's up to you. Obviously the longer you fuss, the more realistic you might be able to make it. Depends on how much time you've got in your hands. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is sort of mark out the area around the iris. So I'm seeing a bit of a pinky undertone, so I'm probably going to put a little bit of this down first and then build up on top of that. That way when I'm using my browns, it's not going to look too dark. If my lines were really dark, I'd be probably working back over them with my eraser to try and get rid of them a little bit first. But these lines are reasonably light, so they're not going to show through my pencil. So again, little tiny circles, and we build up our layers slowly. We don't press hard to create depth of the colour. And you need to keep your pencil really, really sharp, otherwise you're going to get a rough finish. So I'm not fussing too much here because I know I'm going to go back and put some eyelashes over the top of that anyway. And I don't want it too thick because I don't want it to stop me being able to put those eyelashes down. So in the eye, it's a lot more reddy brown. So because I've combined a pink and a brown, I'm not going too far either way. I'm not going too pink and I'm not going too brown. So that's helping it to look nice and fleshy. Some people would use brown here. I'm just going to use black. And when we do an eyelash, we flick, because just like when you do a tick, it's thinner towards the end. So you need to again make sure that your pencil is sharp. You may need to sharpen it between doing eyelashes because it will get blunt as you're working. And think of them as clumps. So all of my flicks are going to clump into points. And there's going to be the odd stray one because it's only natural that they wouldn't all be perfectly clumped together. Pay attention as well to your picture. If your picture has skin showing through here, then don't have them quite so thick along the edge here. So because I put that base tone, I don't have to worry about the white page showing through now. So there's a little bit of a curve on all of those eyelashes. They're not straight up. And I'm darkening this bottom edge here to really make them pop. Notice that some will always be a little bit longer than others, and pay careful attention to when the eyelashes actually start to change direction, get thinner or change colour, because they will not be the same thickness or the same length the whole way along. Okay, now we can do the bottom edge. I like to frame the eye before I go out into the rest of the skin. So again, we're looking for what sort of tones we've got down here. It's probably a little bit more of a lighter pinky tone, so I'm going to use this pencil here, PC927, and I'm going to give myself a base tone on that bottom lid there. So I always work in one small section at a time, not putting a base tone on everything and then trying to do it layer by layer over the whole picture. So then we can put a little bit more of that darker pinky tone in the edges, because I'm seeing it's a bit darker there. But it's probably a little bit too bright. So we want to try and tone it down with a bit more of a browny colour coming through. I'm just going to define the edge of my page there so that we know where it's stopping. And I'm going to take my white and emphasize that bit of highlight that's coming up towards that shadow. If there's anywhere that you want to spend a bit of extra time creating contrast, it's the eye, because when we look at a person, we naturally look towards their eyes. Same thing happens when we look at a drawing. We're just going to naturally look towards the eyes first. So that's generally a focal point if the image you've got is looking at the viewer. So we just want to pay attention to all those little tiny details. Okay, now in here we do not have any pure white. So whilst it's lighter and we can start with a bit of a lighter tone, we need to pay attention to the pinky tones and the grey tones that are coming through to give that its 3D form. So putting some white down as a base. I'm not going to leave it white. I never worry if my white picks up a bit of colour around it, because sometimes I think it looks nice having that colour bleed in. And blow your little grainy bits away when you're doing white so that it doesn't affect it too much if you're smudging. And then you start to put in the tones that you see showing through. I'm seeing a lot of pinky grey tones. I don't want it to be too pink because I don't want her to look sad. So I'm going to take a brownish grey. So these greys that I used on the eye have a blue undertone. The one I'm using now has a brown undertone. And I'm not being too afraid with how dark I go, because I know that I'm going to work back into it with my white. I'm just going to redefine the edge of those eyelashes. And I've decided now that I want that a bit darker too. So it's always just looking back at it and working on it as you go. I try to limit the amount of colours I use so that it's not too overwhelming. But the more you put in there, the better it will probably look. So if you want to do that, go for it. So it's starting to get more of a like a shape happening there, a bit of form. And we really want to make sure that we have that little bit there showing through as well. And then I'm going to take my white and I'm going to start blending that so that I'm getting rid of that scratchiness, because I want a smooth finish. So again, always reviewing what you've done, always working back through it. Nobody's going to get it 100% perfect the first time they put that pencil down on their paper. Play around with different tones. If you find that one is not creating the effect you want, try a different one. And just keep going until you're happy. The thing that makes great artists is that their point of where they're happy to stop is probably a lot further down the track than the average person, and it's just a case of them pushing themselves that little bit further. So all you need to do is just push yourself to try harder, be happier later with your drawings. Don't just go, that's good enough, I'm going to stop now. So some people would stop here. If this was my artwork, I'd probably spend another hour on it, just perfecting it. But for the sake of the demo, I think we'll stop there with the eye and we'll move on to the skin tones around it. So it's really just the same thing again. We always start with a base tone. So if we were doing up here, so I might put a little bit of this down, but this person has quite a lot of pinky undertones. So I put it under where my darker areas are as well, but not too thick because I still want to see the lines that I've marked out. And then I'm going to work a few of my different pinky tones through it. So if your person didn't have pinky undertones, you'd probably jump straight to a brown. You just need to test your browns to see what colours work well. And whenever I'm using like not your typical flesh tones like purples or blues, I put them in afterwards. So let's just define that eyelid there. And it looks a bit funny because I haven't done in here yet, but we'll do that afterwards. So I'm just going to take my lighter tone and try and blend the edge. As I said again, I like to have the edges bleed in to the colour next to them so we don't have any obvious stops and starts. So allowing that colour to blend up into our lighter areas, but still keeping a clearly defined crease there. So as I get up to my darker layers, I start to apply my pencil more gently and with smaller, more circular motions. So the closer I get to that top layer, the more gentle I want to be with my pencil application. And I'm seeing some grey tones in here. So I'm going to pick up that grey that's got a bit of a brown undertone, and I'm going to brush that through, but I'm not using it as my main shadow because I don't want it to look completely grey. And then same thing again, we pick up our lighter tone and we use that to blend it. Pinky tones coming in through the side. So again, you can see I'm working in a section. I don't try and bleed out to the whole artwork all at once. I'm going to make some sort of more textural marks now to sort of replicate the wrinkles that I'm seeing surrounding that eyelid. As you build up your colour more and it starts to get waxy, it starts to get harder to layer your tones. So if you find there's any patches where it's not sticking, you need to focus on those areas with the very tip of your pencil. So you need to keep the pencil really sharp in order to be able to do that. So quite a bit of pressure now as I'm trying to get that dark area to blend. And now I'm going to work back in with a purple because I don't want it to look too grey. So I'm going to brush that through the top of that shadow that I've created and lightly bleed it out into the areas surrounding. And because you've got all those other undertones, and because you're going to then blend it with your base tone, it's not going to look unnatural. It's actually going to add depth to your artwork. Just redefining any skin textures. And making sure that we've got a lot of depth to that shadow. So now we'll just fill in this section here. So there's quite a bit of highlight here, so I'm actually going to put some white down first so that there's no risk of me accidentally losing that. If we go over our eyelashes a little bit, that's okay, we'll just redefine them afterwards. So paying attention to whether or not your base tone has a pink undertone or not, and then choosing the appropriate pencil depending on what those undertones are. So I'm using a pinky undertone at the moment. And I'm allowing the eyelashes to bleed into it a little bit because I kind of like the way it's a little bit fuzzy. And I'm just going to put some white here because I can see that I've got a highlight and I don't want to accidentally lose that. So again, I'm just picking up loads of different colours. I'm constantly swapping and chopping and changing. I've decided I want to emphasize that more with a little bit of black. And another trick I do is I actually put my eyes out of focus when I'm drawing, as if I've been staring at something for a really long time. So when you put things out of focus, you can sort of see how it's going to look if you were standing and looking at it from a distance. And that gives you a good idea of how the viewer's going to see it. Another good thing to do is take a photo of it on your phone and then look at it really small, same effect as if you were looking at it from a distance. Or you might even look at it in a mirror and look at it in reverse so that you're getting a fresh perspective of how it looks. Some people like to leave the eyelashes until afterwards, but I like to put them in first because otherwise I find I lose them underneath all of the different skin tones and then it's hard to put them back in later. Again, I'm seeing some purpley tones, so I'm just going to brush a little bit of it through. We don't want it to look like the person's got purple eyeshadow on, so only a very tiny bit. And then blending it with your base tone. And then I can go back and redefine my eyelashes. and it's really just a case of fussing over it. So that's the basics on skin tones. Just take your time, use lots of different colors, lots of different darks and lights, layer it a lot, add little details in where you see them, and really be careful not to use the lines, not to lose the lines that you've transferred, because if you lose them, it's going to be very hard for you to go back and observe exactly where all those shadows are if you're not trained in to do that. If you are, that's great, but it is a good idea to try and keep those lines if you're not as confident. So that is our eye. Thank you.